In this video podcast, I'm going to talk about ego dissolution, the dark night of the soul, and how to navigate it with ease during your spiritual awakening. And make sure you watch to the end when I share the most powerful way to transcend the energy that keeps you from anchoring in your higher self. But even before I can get into the ego, we really need to talk about the dark night of the soul. The terminology dark night of the soul came from the 16th century Catholic mystic St. John of the Cross. He wrote a famous poem called The Dark Night of the Soul. But that isn't where this started, because ancient saints, mystics, and gurus throughout the centuries have talked about this situation, this internal struggle. When you're experiencing the dark night of the soul, it's this spiritual disconnect that feels empty. You feel lost. You feel like you're in a place of hopeless disconnection, and you don't even know what you're disconnected from. It just feels heavy, and you're not even sure what's going on. It could be considered depression, but it's actually a spiritual depression. It's a spiritual disconnect. It's your disconnection from who you truly are. The dark night of the soul can actually be your catalyst toward your spiritual awakening. And it may also be an initiation to let you acknowledge that you are more than this human body. This is your wake-up call. But you say to yourself, this is a deep, dark place that I'm experiencing right now. This isn't who I am, but I don't know where to go or what to do about this deep darkness inside. It feels like a depression, but you don't want to take medication for the dark night of the soul. You want to work through it. You don't want to spiritually bypass this. It's important to look at what's going on deep inside of yourself and to work through it. Everyone goes through this. It's what they used to call a crisis of faith. Nowadays, we call it spiritual awakening. But really, it's still a catalyst to recognize that something is missing. And that's what it feels like. You feel lost and you feel disconnected. The things that meant something to you in the past, like maybe a relationship or maybe a job, those things don't mean the same thing as they used to, because you know deep inside you're missing something. And that is missing that meaning in your life. You're missing that meaning, that connection with yourself, with your higher self, and the divine itself. Now, I've heard so many people say, I didn't want to come here. That's not what I wanted. I was forced to come and incarnate on the earth plane. And that can really never be true, because your soul has made a choice to be here. No one would ever force you to do this, because if you came from the source energy of unconditional deep love and compassion and connection, the creator source would never force you to do something you didn't want. When you say, I didn't want to come here, you're experiencing the dark night of the soul. I remember saying that many years ago. Why did I decide to incarnate? That's it. This is my last lifetime here. And it was because I was really experiencing a very deep spiritual depression. And I was going through my own dark night of the soul. But what I did, instead of sitting in the suffering and sitting in the depth of despair, was I said, okay, what can I do to shift this? What can I do to change this energy? And I started looking into healing modalities and working through some inner issues. I didn't stay in the depth of depression, but many people go through the dark night of the soul several times. It's not a one-shot deal. Unfortunately, it's not. Many times we experience the dark night of the soul over and over and over again. And it's because the ego's identity is holding on to this belief of who it is. But there's this higher consciousness that says, hey, man, there's something else. Don't sit in that ego identity. Or maybe what happened in your dark night of the soul is that your ego identity was crushed. It was completely demolished. Maybe you lost someone close to you that you identified with. Maybe you went through a breakup that crushed you. And maybe that is the ego's identity of mother, of lover, of friend, of daughter, of son. Maybe that was what crushed you. And now it's gone. And there you are trying to reevaluate, who am I? What does this all mean? Why am I here? What was I thinking coming here with all this suffering? Why do people suffer? What is really happening? Is there a God? Is there really a source? So you get my drift. You question everything that you were told in your life and everything you experience. Now what happens for many is that they may go through and do an ayahuasca journey, or they may do mushrooms, or they may take medication. And they do this in a form of antidepressants. And while all these things are great, they're quick fixes. They're not going to shift you into constant higher states of consciousness. The medication for depression will actually numb you out and disconnect you even more, but it will feel a little bit better, but you'll still feel disconnected. And if you're taking any sort of psychedelics, which is fine, you may not be integrating the experience and you're not doing the inner work. Any quick fix is only going to take you so far. They're not going to keep you in a higher state of consciousness more consistently. And once you experience those higher states of bliss and love on a psychedelic journey, you will start to chase it and chase it more and more. As an intuitive, I can see what happens on psychedelics if you don't do the inner work as well. So please do your inner work. Look at your shadow. Follow teachers who have done their inner work and really have shifted some things for themselves and shifted multidimensionally. You don't want to rely on anything external to change your internal self. The reason the dark night of the soul is called spiritual depression is because it's an existential crisis, which means it's a crisis of the human condition of the soul, of suffering. And when you go through that, that's not depression. That's this understanding like, what is going on? Who am I? You usually feel so alone and disconnected. It's really this hopeless and helpless, disconnected feeling. But what you're really looking for is, how do I fit into this world? Who am I in this world? What was I thinking when I came here? And I keep on saying that I've heard so many people say through all the years I've been working with clients is, what was I thinking when I came here to this family? Why did I incarnate with a family that is abusive? Or maybe they were alcoholics or addicted to drugs. Why did I do that? And this is what's happening. But this is the catalyst for your spiritual awakening. And it's also the catalyst for you to accelerate your spiritual ascension process. Because in this existential crisis, you have the ability to shift and change things on a really deep level. Sometimes we need to go through this dark night of the soul to come out at a much higher vibration. I know it sucks, because when you're going through it, you're like, why am I doing this? And if you do your work, you come out the other side with a higher state of consciousness and awareness of who you truly, truly are. One of the pitfalls of the dark night of the soul is that you start to identify with the dark night of the soul. So you identify with depression, you identify with your victim self, and you identify with somebody who wants to be rescued. So your deep, dark depression is part of you. It means that you're not willing to do the inner work. You're looking for something outside of you to make this all go away. But unfortunately, when you're going through the dark night of the soul, you have to go deep inside and look at it. You don't want to spiritually bypass it or fall into your own victim mode and your need to be saved. And I encourage you to acknowledge that for yourself. If so, you want to grow and transform now. What you want to do with these dark night of the soul issues is you want to transcend and transmute it in order to experience ego dissolution. The first thing you must understand is that you're going through the dark night of the soul. And what I find a lot of spiritual seekers and star seeds is that they go through this dark night of the soul, but then they say, oh no, I'm supposed to be love and light, and it's all supposed to be lollipops, rainbows, and unicorns. But it's not. And oops, what do I do about all this darkness? Oh, I know. I'm just going to pretend, or I'm going to go to try and do this other thing to make me feel better. And of course, dance, sing, exercise, talk to your friends, etc. Those are all great ways. But to really transform and transmute the lower self and egoic self, it's your responsibility to go through the dark night of the soul. You have to do the inner work. And for a lot of spiritual people, they want to get through that darkness quickly, get through it and be done with it. And they're not willing to go into the depth of themselves and really look at what's going on. And they also don't always want to change their ego because they're starting to build up a spiritual ego. And when you build the spiritual ego, you want everybody to see you as the spiritual person. I'm special now because I'm this higher spiritual person. I'm hitting the 23rd dimension, and you are not. You don't want to build that spiritual ego because that darkness will build your spiritual ego, especially if you're not willing to do the inner work. And I hope I'm not annoying you with this. You got to do your work. You must do your work. I get it. I've been on this path for a very, very long time. I'm always doing my inner work, and I don't mess around and pretend that I don't have crap that is in my way. And the good thing is you come out the other end differently. And I know for me, the dark nights of the soul that I've been through, I've been able to transcend and transmute that energy. So now, if I go through a slight piece of the dark night of the soul, I have the tools and the awareness to shift through it quickly. So the more work you do inside, the easier it will become. But let's get back to the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is so important because it shows you there's a piece of ego that needs to be dissolved. And it's so important as a wake-up call. It's your initiation to say, hey, this is not who I am. I'm not human. There's so much more. And that's the depth of spiritual depression and disconnect, is to wake you up to the realization that your ego has been feeding you a line of BS over and over again. Don't believe it's BS. Well, if they think that you're this type of person, then you'll be loved. If you believe that you're good enough, then you'll have everything that you desire in your life. But that's a lie. Your ego tells you all the time. And the dark night of the soul is propelling you into recognizing the lie and to help you see through the Maya or illusion of the lie the ego says. And I know when you're going through this, it feels like it will go on forever. And there's no way out. When I went through the dark night of the soul, I would be on the bathroom floor crying, or I'd be in a very dark room and I would just be in this despair energy. And I knew that it was a depth that I could not figure out, but I wouldn't give up on myself. And I don't want you to give up on yourself either, because it's all about dissolving this egoic place. Now, I don't think that crying it out is necessarily the solution, because you're not really being aware of what you're not taking full responsibility for and what you need to transcend and to take responsibility for your healing. But sometimes crying happens. It's a stage of this despair. And I know it's not fun. I know it's difficult and it feels super scary at times, because you're afraid of what might happen if you don't get out of this deep, dark depression. But without the dark night of the soul, you don't have the availability for this deep spiritual transformation to happen. And that's the key, because if you're working on opening to your higher self, your higher consciousness, and becoming more expanded in love and oneness, you have to dissolve your egoic energies, all those lower frequencies. And that's what spiritual transformation is all about. But sometimes you need that catalyst, that darkness inside to say, hey, wake up. You are still sitting in this egoic frequency. Wake up, become more of who you truly are. And that's what the ascension is really about. It's about propelling you towards this great awakening within. And it's because so many of us are waking up, but there is this dissolution of the ego that needs to happen. And how do you experience the catalyst of that? Unfortunately, yep, sometimes it's that dark night of the soul that comes in, that depth and that despair. Now, look, I don't believe that you need to be fixed. Actually, there's nothing wrong with you at all. When you're going through the dark night of the soul, it's the ego energy. And you think, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me that I need to fix. I need to get rid of. I need to do something about. And it's the ego. And what happens is you think, okay, I'll do a bunch of ayahuasca ceremonies. I need to go to many healers. And yes, all those things may help you. But there's really nothing wrong with you, because your ego's showing you that it's time for you to connect to your soul, saying, and your soul's going, dude, come on, come join me. And there's nothing wrong with you working through those lower states of consciousness, because when you work through those lower states of consciousness, you have the availability to open up to higher states of consciousness. And you are whole. You are perfect just as you are. Because when you think you need to be fixed, you look outside yourself for someone or something to fix you and to save you. But it's the ego's way of keeping you in a place of despair and distraught energy, and that you can't do it yourself. I want to be really honest with you. I've watched so many people who have tried to go into the depth and do their own healing work, and that's okay. But they're only hitting the surface because they're keeping their egoic identity intact. They're not always able to go deeper, because that's the reason the ego likes it. It's called shadow work for a reason, that you don't have to look at the darkness, because it's hidden. It's hidden from you. And the ego is part of the parts of you that is hiding it. You don't always have the availability to see it. And I don't want you to go through and say, okay, I'm going to try to fix this, fix myself, or heal myself. I want you to say, how can I empower myself through this? Maybe it's for someone else to help you to empower yourself. Maybe it's for you to do some inner work and meditation work and be consistent in your practice, or find a really great healer to help you who can dissolve the ego. But the great thing about every dark night of the soul that I've experienced and that I've watched countless people experience is that it makes you see through your illusion and see your life. It really is something that you never forget. And I hear many spiritual people say that the dark night of the soul was their spiritual awakening. It was a catalyst to change their life, because it really changes you in such a deep way if you do the work. It changes you completely. It shifts your identity, your ego identity of who you thought you were, and it shifts you into transforming your belief systems and how you perceive yourself in the world. And sometimes it even dissolves that part of you, that egoic energy. Because look, if you want to completely embody your higher consciousness and become the energy of oneness, love, bliss, you have to dissolve the ego, because there's not enough room in your energy field for the ego and your higher self. Because to fully embody everything, there has to be enough room. But what happens to many people, and I mean this so lovingly, is that so many people express their spiritual ego. So you don't want to recreate your ego and create it into a spiritual ego, which happens often. So you just want to be more cognizant that you go through this process and you don't recreate the ego into the spiritual ego. You want to transcend and transmute the ego identity to become your higher consciousness. The dark night of the soul is your wake-up call to say, hey, I'm living in an illusion. I'm living in a matrix that has been created partially by me and my own ego, and yuck. And now that we've talked a lot about ego, ego's not a bad thing. Your ego has created your own matrix, and that doesn't sound like something that I would want in my life. Because if you want to have that joy, that happiness, that connection with all that you are, you want to connect more to your higher consciousness. And that means that you're less connected to your ego or spiritual ego. So let's look at what happens when you experience the dark night of the soul. Your whole world is ripped apart. In shamanism, one of the things that people go through in a shamanic journey in the lower world is that your animal guide or your totem may start ripping apart your energy and your body. And it will actually disassemble the body. But what it's really doing is disengaging the physicality or the egoic belief system of what you think you are or who you think you are, and reassembling it. So basically, in the shamanic experience, you're pulling apart and ripping out the ego. And sometimes it's not always pleasant. Sometimes it can freak people out. I've had it happen to me in some of my journeys in many different ways and in many times. And each time I recognize that something is shifting within me and I'm okay with it. I surrender into it. I surrender into the dark night of the soul. I surrender into the journey, but it's not always pleasant. And that's the same thing with the dark night of the soul. It can feel like you're being ripped apart from that, like from the inside out. You feel fragile, but through that, you have the ability to grow, to shift, to change, to recreate who you truly are. The emptiness that you feel inside is a place where there are a lot of things that are hiding. This is where all that negative death or the trauma in your life, it's sitting in that empty place, sitting in that empty place inside of you. And sometimes you may want to die, but the part of you that is in the despair that wants to die is really the ego. But what happens is the ego then screams and kicks and says, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. But that's the ego's thing. It's here to keep you safe. So, of course, it doesn't want to die because it sees itself connected to the physical body. And its goal is to keep you safe and to keep the body alive. So what really happens when you go through the dark night of the soul is it's your wake-up call. It's saying, hey, this is not working anymore. Who you thought you were isn't who you are. And it's that catalyst, that beacon in the middle of the night saying, please, please wake up. Please connect with your higher self, your higher consciousness. But in that desire for connection, you feel disconnected, which is kind of the paradox of our world because we live in this illusion of separation and then we're one and we're connected. But how can we be both? That is the paradox of the third dimension. I actually think that the ego tries to disengage us from our spiritual seeking and awakening and from contacting and becoming our own higher consciousness. Now, it doesn't do this consciously, obviously. That's because, of course, 95% of your waking life is ruled by your subconscious programming. So your subconscious gets involved and says you can't have a connection with your higher self. And it's doing that because it's just seeing you as insignificant and that you've had all these difficult things happen and that you've had a difficult life. And remember when you did that thing, that terrible thing, you should feel guilty and ashamed and angry at yourself. It's just playing with you. It thinks, oh, you should feel hurt, you should feel pain, and it sits in the despair energy. But your higher consciousness is begging you to come back. It's calling you. It's been hoping that you'll answer the call. And for some people, it's this connection that they sense, or they have this glimpse of their creator or a God, or a glimpse of their higher states of consciousness, of love, of bliss, of unity. And then it goes away. Now that higher state of consciousness energy is gone. And the lower self or egoic self gets in the way, and the subconscious programs start to take over. And then you say, well, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. Why isn't this happening or that happening? And you go into this crazy place again. And it's the paradox of the egoic self and the higher self. And you don't want them to be in competition. It's very important that you don't do that, because it's like, who's going to win? Because you know who's going to win. The ego is going to win because it wants to win. It has more skin in the game to win. And that's the part of us that is holding us back from connecting to all that we are. But your higher consciousness isn't looking to win. It's waiting for you to answer the call. It's waiting for you to connect. And all the great mystics have told you this through the years, that you can do this. You can transform and you can transmute this lower darkness of the ego and then become more in your higher self, more energy of love, of bliss, of oneness. And basically, this is what is called the death and rebirth energy, right? The flow of death and rebirth. And this is the archetypes and the spiritual teachings of death and rebirth. Death and rebirth is a representation that a part of you has to die off or transcend in order to be reborn, to recreate itself. So basically, you're recreating your old ego's belief systems, your old egoic programming, and recreating yourself through this dark night of the soul. It's so hard when you feel like you don't have any purpose or any meaning in your life. I think that most people are seeking something, and they think it's going to be outside of themselves because obviously that's what your society and family have taught you, that it's outside of yourself. But in reality, most people are seeking or wanting to feel more connected, more loved, and more joy in their life. And now everything that brought them semi-happiness in their life is gone because something has shifted. Maybe it was a catalyst of something difficult happening in your life. But now those things no longer have the same meaning. Maybe you achieved some of those goals that you had. Maybe you have that nice house. Maybe you have that child or that partner. And now you're lacking the purpose or meaning behind yourself. And the ego will say, okay, chase after this. Okay, go chase after that. Go get that. And they're chasing. But they still don't feel fulfilled, loved, or connected. And then they go through the depth of the dark night of the soul again to help activate this connection with themselves. And now that you understand a little bit more of the dark night of the soul, I'm going to share a few more videos after this about ego, shadow work, and some really great ways to transform and transmute old energies so that you can anchor in your higher consciousness. So make sure you subscribe. And if you want to learn more about spiritual bypassing, please watch this video here called Spiritual Bypassing Examples. Much love.